The following is a fourth-hand production.
Howdy, and welcome to another episode of the Juan Podcast. I'm your host, Juan. Today we talk to Thomas Hatsis. Tom Hatsis writes and speaks on psychedelic and entheogenic history. He is the author of the Witches Ointment, The Secret History of Psychedelic Magic, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, Spirit Plants, Magical Practices, Ecstatic States, and Microdosing Magic, a Psychedelic Spellbook. He has appeared on the Gaia TV show Beyond Belief with George Noory, Psychedelica, and Open Minds with Regina Meredith, as well as having articles published in Psychedelic Press U.K. and the Journal of Psychedelic Studies. He is the curator of the Psychedelic History Project Library, the world's largest online repository. Along with partner Eden Woodruff, Hatsis co-runs Psanctum Psychedelia, a psychedelic education and harm reduction group which hosts the annual Gaian Mind Psychedelic Conference. Finally, Hatsis is an activist pushing for the decriminalization of plant medicines in his home state of Oregon. When not fully engaged spreading psychedelia, he writes and performs music and plays roller derby. On today's episode, we break down the use of psychedelic and psychoactive substances with Tom in different religions and different practices. We talk about other things as well, some clarifications of some things I've said wrongly on the show before, and I'll go out and say it, that I sometimes say things that aren't correct because I'm only remembering information and regurgitating it back the way I see fit sometimes, and it's like playing telephone. Sometimes you get it wrong, but we talk about that. We talk about the supposed symbolism of mushrooms in Christianity, and that Christianity is a mushroom cult. And they go as far as saying that Jesus was a mushroom. I, for one, was a person that have talked about this, and jokingly I've said it before, but since I had a scholar of this sort of this realm on the show, I decided to ask him because he does talk about this. And we also debunked the whole Santa Claus was an Amanita muscaria, along with other things. So without further ado, this is Psychedelia in Religion with Thomas Hatsis. And we are live. Welcome to the show, Tom, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, man.
I appreciate it. I'd come across your work a few months ago, and when I was looking into what I just told you about the Bavarian purity law, and we can talk about that later. And today we're going to be talking about psychedelia in religion, and a little bit about everything. We're going to be talking about psychedelics as well. I just told you that I've started growing my first mushrooms about 4 months ago, and I had my first experience with them about 3 weeks ago. Obviously, from my own cultivation, I took my own supply, I guess you could say. I don't feel like you could know the whole truth without actually, I talk about psychedelics all the time, DMT, LSD, all these different substances, and I had never tried them. So I felt obviously it was a learning process for me, and I'm a kind of guy who I like the process of things. So that's why I started this podcast, the process, meeting people like you, learning from people like you. And I like to bring people on because there's some things, like I told you, that I think I know about, when in reality I don't know shit. So sure. That's my main thing. I at the end of the day, I don't know shit, and I learn from people like you and from different sources. So,
well, we all learn together.
Yeah, exactly. But somebody like you who's dedicated their life to researching topics that we're going to talk about today, obviously going to be more well-versed than me, who watch a couple YouTube videos on it and read a couple articles and it's like, okay, I'm good to go, right? And what I admire about you is that I've seen a couple of your lectures, and when people ask you questions you don't know about, you flat out tell them, I don't know.
Well,
And
yeah.
I'd rather
Yeah,
not talk about it because I don't know about it, right? Instead of spreading false information, because I know how you feel about conspiracy theorists.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what there are far too many people spreading bullshit. And, to the best of my ability, I don't want to contribute to that. Now, there might be things that I say that are incorrect. But, that happens to everybody. It's when people like are palpably, ignorant of something and they talk about it, that I get a little, but I think everybody gets like that, in your own subject area. I call it shitting on my kitchen floor. And it's like, so I have this house, and it's this house that I've spent a lot of time building. And I checked all the plumbing in it, all the carpentry, no termites, no nothing. And then somebody just walks in and takes a shit right on my kitchen floor. And it's like, well, why did you do that? I'm not,
Yeah.
I don't like, I wouldn't go on, let's say, Joe Rogan, who has some of the most backwards ideas about historical psychedelics. And I like him, I'm a fan of his, but he doesn't know anything about psychedelic history. And it's like, well, how would he feel if me, knowing nothing about martial arts, got on the one-on-one podcast and said, hey, you know what? In order to be a mixed martial artist, you have to take up smoking, eat McDonald's 3 times a day, and kick every puppy you see. Joe Rogan would be, well, he doesn't have hair, but he would be flipping out because I would be taking a shit right on his kitchen floor.
I agree.
That's all it is. I just think that, we all, I don't know, it's okay to discuss things and it's okay to speculate about things, but when people speak with confidence about absolute, and it's just bullshit, it's just, there's just too much of it. We're drowning in bullshit. Like, I don't know how old you are, but I'm a little bit older probably. There was a time in my life when there was a lot less bullshit because the internet didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
I like the internet. I like the internet, but
I posted a quote not too long ago on my Instagram. I was like, there's more information now and less meaning. There's more information in time now than there ever was, but less meaning. And it's like, it's true.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. Because like we have computers in our pockets, but we're watching, Justin
TikTok.
Bieber on YouTube. So it's like, well, what does it matter that you have the world's information at your fingertips if you're watching Justin Bieber? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's society, that's conditioning, that's where they have us. We'd rather watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians than learn about things that actually matter. Right?
Yeah, of course, because now you'll just be an obedient consumer that gives a shit what the Kardashians are doing instead of like focusing on your own life and your own, your own power, really. And that's, I guess, what is a little, what's the word? It's sad, really, because you want to see people like recognize and hone their own magic and their own power and wield it in a force for good in the world that benefits society. But they're on YouTube, like watching flat earth videos. And it's like, well, it's sad.
Before we get any further into it, Tom, can you share where people can find your work and reach out to you if they wanted to after, before we dive in here?
Sure, absolutely. It's funny because that's usually the last question interviewers ask after everybody has stopped listening to the
I do it at the beginning and I do it at the end. So
I love that. That's great, man. So psychedelichahistorian.com or Instagram at psychedelichistorian. And facebook.com/psychedelic historian. And we're putting up a new website that's going to be the world's largest online repository of psychedelic literature. That's psychedelichistoryproject.com. It's not up yet. There's nothing there. But in a few months, there's going to be almost every article ever written on psychedelia from the late 1800s all the way up to the present day.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And like I told you, today we're going to get a little bit metaphysical. We're going to talk about the actual things that you found through your research. So the first question I always ask everybody, it gets a little deep, but who is Thomas Hatsis?
The worst interviewee you will ever encounter.
And that's it.
I don't know. I'm not that deep.
No.
I'm just a person. There's nothing, like there's,
Right
there's
on.
nothing there. Sorry. I wish that I were this very deep, insightful
Spiritual person. Here I
Sure.
was. I've had people tell me all types of things. I am everything and I am nothing. And here's Tom, the worst interviewee.
Well, you know what it is? I'm not that pretentious. I wouldn't say that I'm everything and nothing all at once. I am the dancing cosmos of the infinite mind. Yeah, maybe that's true, but I mean, would you ever really say that out loud?
Yeah.
Come on.
I think I heard you say something about we are the universe trying to understand ourselves. Is that you that I heard say that?
Well, that's Carl Sagan. I quoted
Sagan.
that in my book, Microdosing Magic, a Psychedelic Spellbook. But yeah, that's Carl Sagan. Yeah, we're all we're the universe trying to know itself, and that's actually one of the reasons that I'm against things like keeping up with the Kardashians. Like it's weird. It's like I'm not against the Kardashians at all. I wish them nothing but success and happiness in life. I'm against people giving a shit about keeping up with them instead of fostering and manifesting their own dreams and desires and bringing their personal spark of the universe into life.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I get you. People are worried about the wrong things always, it seems like. But like I said, that's the conditioning of society and how we're in this simulation, if you will.
Oh, you're a simulation theory guy?
I don't know what I am anymore, Tom. I like to keep an open mind, but not so much that my brain falls out, but just enough to be able to. And obviously, I had never ever tried any type of psychoactive substance, and it definitely puts you in another realm, and it just makes me believe it. I can't. I've talked to a couple friends of mine who have had 5-MeO, NN-DMT, and I asked him, I said, what happens after we die? And I like to sometimes think that maybe nothing happens and we just turn to nothing, and it's not going to hurt to be nothing because nothing is nothing is nothingness. But then I have buddies of mine who have had these crazy experiences on DMT and have met these entities and all these crazy experiences who I can't have that conversation with them because they obviously know there's something more to this than meets the eye.
Well, we don't know what, like, we believe. So what I would say to that, and I've said this before, is that so with 5-MeO cured what I called my adult onset atheism, in that it did the same thing for me and made me realize, well, for me anyway, and of course I could be wrong. One of the arguments against my position is that, we're all making it up in our heads, when we have these, but the thing
simulacra.
is, like, was that?
That's simulacra, when we give these things power, and at the end of the day, it's just a symbol. It's not anything except what we make it to be.
Sure, but the thing is that I'm not that creative, which is why I write history and not novels. And the truth, no, seriously, there is no way. Like, I've done 5-MeO, I've done IO, I've done all of it. Like I've done all of them. And I am not that creative. I could never make up what I'm seeing. I could not make up the entities I encounter. Like, I'm not that creative of a person. And I wish I were that creative. I'd love to come back. Yeah, I just invented all that, and I'm going to go write, the next great American novel on this because I'm just that creative, but I'm not. So that's why I think there actually is something there, and I side with the people who are saying that they're meeting these entities and having these real encounters because, again, I'm not that creative.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I believe in the more I look into this, and we're going to get a little bit about early Christianity because it fascinates me. And I talk a lot about ancient civilizations on my show, the correlation there. And starting last night, I opened up another can of worms with a buddy of mine where I'm learning about, I don't know if you've heard about Tartaria. Have you heard about that?
No.
Well, it's
like Tartarus from like the Greek underworld?
No, not Tartarus, Tartaria.
No, not familiar.
It's it's a wormhole. I'll send you videos on it after the
Please.
show, but pretty much is we have, obviously, time is a construct of humanity, and you have the Scaligerian, I believe is his name, Joseph Scaligeria. I got to look into it. He invented chronology, and pretty
Okay.
much the AD and BC system that we have today. But
Oh,
he just so happens to be a Jesuit, and it just goes down there. The Kabbalah and all this stuff. It's pretty much why the Jews run the world type thing, and
oh,
how
Jesus.
they've hidden the origins of humanity, we actually come from Ireland and the Irish and all this crazy. It's really deep, and pretty much just blows everything else out of the water that I've learned. Like, you have the World Fair of 1893, where you have 694 acres of these crazy beautiful buildings, and they were used for 6 months and just torn down in Chicago. But
Sure.
it's very strange, very strange. I can send you some stuff after the show on it. But before we start talking about this, I want you to tell the people a little bit about you and what you do in your work, and then maybe we could talk about the books that you've written. I know you've written a couple. I know you also do witchcraft, correct me if I'm wrong, and
Yes.
studied it. Can you talk and tell the people a little bit about your work and what you do?
Sure. I write on psychedelic history. I do my best. So let me just clear this up real quick. So history is not an exact science at all. History works off probabilities. So everything that I'm going to say about psychedelic history is based on what probably happened, not what we know happened. We can't reproduce history in a test tube the way a biologist can look at this beaker, look at this flask. Oh, you mix this and this, and a million times the same elements are going to come out of it. That's not how history works. We're at a loss most of the time. So what I try to do is determine and find where there's accurate cause to call something psychedelic history in the past. One of the things I've noticed that people do is that anything bizarre that happened in the past will be attributed to either aliens or psychedelics. 9 times out of 10, it's neither. Or with aliens, 10 times out of 10, it's neither. But with psychedelics, 9 times. Now, it's not to say aliens don't exist and that they haven't visited Earth. It's just that I don't think they built the pyramids. That's all I mean by that. I don't think they had any handle in human civilization. There are far better naturalistic evolutionary explanations for the things that people think, oh my God, how could human beings do this? Well, if you have enough time and enough slaves and you don't give a shit about their well-being, you can build a pyramid. Guaranteed you could build a pyramid. Because if they don't work for you, you're just going to slaughter them. So, sorry, I got off on a tangent there.
No, I agree. I talk about that, about this missing link in history, and that Tartaria thing kind of hints at that. And I like to speculate. It's fun. It's fun
Oh,
to come up
yeah.
with things. But with history is what do they say? To the victor, the spoils, right? The
Sometimes.
victors write history sometimes.
Sometimes not. So it's weird. It's interesting because while the victors might write their accounts, it's historians who actually write history. And
Yes.
I'll give you an example that just happened to me recently as I finish up my latest book. It's due in 2 weeks, May, or not even anymore. May 1st it's due. But in Timothy Leary's book Flashbacks, he has a conversation that supposedly took place between him and Aldous Huxley. Now, anybody familiar with Huxley's work, which I am, knows that this conversation did not take place and that Leary completely made it up. So while the victor, in this case Leary, did write that history, me, the historian, is saying, no, you're full of shit.
Yes.
So
It's up to you, for people like you, historians, to connect the dots. And
yes.
that's something I want to talk to you about later on, about these interpretations of certain events, certain figures in history, whether it be religious or not. And yeah, so I'm sorry. Continue.
No, not at all. But yeah, so it's not always like they do write the accounts, but we historians go through it and we look at other ancillary evidence, and we could actually, again, it's all probability, but we can more or less gauge what might what probably happened. Again, I don't ever want to say that we know it happened because we don't, but we can what's the word? What am I trying to say here? We adjudicate what the sources that are left to us, and we're actually the ones that write history, and we're the ones that, for lack of a better way of putting it, call out. And I hate call out culture, but will, just demonstrate why this person who was writing in history might not be leaving an accurate account. Especially something like the Civil War. You have one account from one person that says one thing, but then you have 10 accounts from some other people that all didn't know each other and were not conspiring, and they have very, and theirs makes a little bit more sense. Well, now we know that first guy was probably full of shit,
That's how you get conspiracy theories too.
What's that?
That's how you get conspiracy theories. You have actual thing, then you have something that somebody says happened. You have the actual narrative, and then you have all these different other crazy theories of what might have happened or what could have happened.
Well, sure. And one of the problems with conspiracy theories is that sometimes they're pretty accurate. I mean, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that got us into Vietnam, that was a conspiracy theory, whatever, but was 100% true. I actually, or what about Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah.
He absolutely did not kill himself. I mean, and you have to be an idiot if you think he did. That's a conspiracy theory. The only other one I'd say I believe is that I do not think Kurt Cobain killed himself.
I haven't gone down that wormhole, but I could see he was part of Hollywood. He was in that scene. There's a lot of people who have died because they are ready to expose, like Isaac Cappy when he supposedly killed himself because he was talking about exposing this pedophilia ring in Hollywood, and other people attached to that have also killed themselves as well. If you really look into it, it happens. I can see where it could be. Maybe he didn't kill himself.
Yeah, it's amazing how all of these people killed themselves with 2 bullets to the head.
Yeah.
I don't think Kurt Cobain killed himself. There's a great, I don't know if you ever saw, but I'm not big on documentaries showing truth, because most documentaries are not made by historians, they're made by filmmakers. But there is one that I would recommend to you and your listeners. It's called Soaked in Bleach. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it's on I think it's on YouTube. It's definitely on Netflix. It's about how the private investigator who was looking into, the Kurt Cobain situation came to the conclusion that it was probably Courtney Love that had him killed. And the evidence that he has is remarkable. I mean, I'm convinced that she had him murdered.
Yeah, I think I've heard about that. I saw a friend of mine post that. Can I ask you, have you seen Tiger King?
So I don't have Netflix anymore. I lost it several months ago. My subscription ran out and I just never renewed it. I'm actually dying to see Tiger King, because I'm sure if you're on Facebook, literally it's either coronavirus or that everybody hates Joe Biden or Tiger King. That's my entire Facebook feed right now.
I forgot to tell you before we started, we don't talk about coronavirus anymore on this show. I'm done giving it energy.
Oh yeah, no, I don't want to talk about it either. I'm just saying that's what I'm with you there, my friend. We don't need I don't even want to talk about it. I'm just saying, no, unfortunately, I have not seen Tiger King. So if anybody out there wants to loan me their Netflix password, I will not abuse it at all. I just want to binge Tiger King while I'm stuck inside.
Yeah, I would recommend you watch that, because there's a little bit of a conspiracy theory there as well. That's why I asked you about it, because it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild.
It's what is the conspiracy? It's that Carol Baskin, and again, I only know this because of memes, that she killed her husband. Is that what it is, or are you referring to something else?
That's one of them, and then how supposedly he's in jail, as you know. He
Wait, who's he?
The Tiger King, Joe Exotic.
He's in jail.
Yeah, so there's another dude. That
That's the
show
dude with
is
the mullet, right?
yeah.
With
That
the
show
worst
is
haircut ever. That guy.
that show's fucking wild, dude.
I want to see it so
That
bad.
show is fucking wild. I don't want to ruin it for you, man. Just you're gonna have to check it out.
I want to.
So Tom, back to the topic.
Sorry.
So we've already established that obviously you are a historian. You go based off of interpretations of things. So whatever you say, it might not be 100%. It's a lot more than I will ever know about something. But what is it that you have researched and talk about your work a little bit?
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. We got onto
It's all right.
The first book I ever wrote was actually a book about roller derby because I was involved in roller derby for 12 years or so. And it's just about my experiences being a roller derby mascot in the roller derby underworld. So it has nothing to do with what you're asking. Sorry. The next book I wrote is called The Witches Ointment, which was the first real in-depth study of medieval psychedelia. I wanted to know what wise women were actually doing with, different kinds of psychoactive plants. And let me say, I still don't know, but I have, my ideas of what probably happened, which was that these women were worshiping a female divinity using these entheogenic plants. And the Catholic Church condemned that as trips to visit Satan at this party, for lack of a better term, called the Sabbath. My follow-up to that is called Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, and it's pretty much just about psychedelia in Western civilization. One of the I guess the mistakes that people have today is that there wasn't psychedelia in the West. And somebody's got a lawnmower scooter going, sorry. That there wasn't psychedelia in the West. Oh, okay, good. We focus if you go to a head shop or something like that, you'll see books about ayahuasca. You'll see books about First Nations people's use of different plant medicines and stuff, but you won't hear anything or see anything about how the ancient Greeks used psychedelics, or even the ancient Egyptians, essentially the civilizations around the ancient Mediterranean. So that's what my second book was about, is how, people around the ancient Mediterranean used plant medicines. My third book was Microdosing Magic, a Psychedelic Spellbook, which is just a kind of a beginner's guide to using psychedelics and magical techniques. It's written for a general audience. So anybody that, has studied magic or studied witchcraft, you're not going to get anything out of it. Everything in that book you already know. It's for a general population of people that, this is something new to them. And the book I'm working on now is tentatively titled Wonder Child, and it's about the LSD revolution during the 1950s. Again, one of the things I try to do with my books is show the unpopular side of psychedelic history. We think about LSD and our minds automatically go to the 1960s and the psychedelic 60s, the Summer of Love, Sgt. Pepper, Woodstock, all that stuff. And all that stuff is great. The thing is, the concepts of peace and love and mystical use of LSD and stuff, all of that was actually invented during the 1950s. It's just that most people didn't have television yet, so it didn't, reach out to the broader culture. In the 1960s, everybody started to get televisions, and all of a sudden, you have LSD and, news reports and everything all over the place. So what I'm trying to do is show the back history of LSD with this new book. So that's what I just try to do with my writing, is show the stuff that a lot of people haven't really heard before. Like we all know about Timothy Leary, of course, but a lot of us don't know about Rosalind Haywood, who during the 1950s, actually, she was a parapsychologist and tried to use LSD for different kinds of psychic phenomena to unlock all of our psychic potentials. And I think that she is such an interesting story, and it's like nobody's ever heard of her. So I wanted to kind of showcase all those stories from psychedelic history that we're not as familiar with. That's what I try to do anyway.
Yeah, esoteric knowledge, focusing on the things that people would have never. It's like the argument with Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. Everybody knows about Thomas Edison, not so much Nikola Tesla.
Exactly.
But then there's conspiracies, revolving around that. What got you started researching these sorts of topics, and how do you embark on a journey like this? What does that entitle? Obviously, I know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you translate. Is it Latin? You translate?
Latin is my main research language, but I can translate Spanish and Italian as well.
Okay. So, what got you started on these topics, and obviously, how do you even start something like this? Because sometimes when I'm researching something, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know where to look sometimes. And it can be very difficult to even start on crazy, different topics like this.
Sure. Well, a really good start would be to suck at the STEM fields, which I do.
What does that mean?
Science, technology, I don't know what the engineering and math. I
Oh, okay.
suck at all of those areas of, knowledge. So I write history. In fact, scratch the surface of any person in the humanities, and what you're going to find is a lousy math student. So that's really what got me started. And I enjoy the detective work of the whole thing, and that's another thing. You like anything else in the world, you have to love what you're doing, or you're not going to be able to do it, because it's going to be infuriating throughout the process. Like even this book I'm writing now, like I love writing psychedelic history, and trying to finish Wonder Child has been one of the most overwhelming and infuriating exercises of my life. Same with writing the Witches Ointment. It was just like, it's infuriating to write history. So you have to love it first and foremost. So I was 18 years old when I had my first mushroom experience. And I think, like a lot of people that come back from that first psychedelic experience, whether it's mushrooms or LSD or anything, you're just like, holy shit, I want to know everything about what the fuck just happened. Like, what was that, and how could I get as close to it as possible? Now, there's some people that are way smarter than me will get into astrophysics and cosmology and philosophy and things like that. I'm pretty stupid. So I settled on history because I could actually do that. And again, I love the detective work. Like, I love when somebody shows me, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but when somebody shows me a picture that they believe to be a mushroom in Christian art, I absolutely love completely eviscerating it. I love doing it. I love just leaving ignorance with nothing to say at all. Like, that's what I love about it. As far as how you start, one of the problems we have today is that people think that Google is the finishing point. What I mean by that is, and I love Google. Google is fantastic. I'm not shitting on Google, but it's just a starting point.
Yeah.
Most people, when they Google something, whatever the first thing that come up is that agrees with them, their confirmation bias, it kicks right in. Me, I always, anytime I Google something, I Google the opposite of what I want to be true, 100% of the time. Always look at the things that completely cut against what you want to believe. In fact, when I was a college professor a few years ago, but I ended up hating it. I'd worked so hard my whole life to become one, and I got there. I'm like, yo, this is the shittiest job ever. But anyway, always, every semester, my first assignment for my students was just write me a page, 2 pages, maybe 3 if you're passionate. I don't care, whatever. Something that you believe to be true. I don't care what it is. Something in history, something spiritual, something political. I don't care. Whatever it is, just write me an essay on something you hold in your heart to be true. The second assignment was, now go prove it wrong.
Wow, yeah. That can fall in line with a lot of things. I talk about the indoctrination, and we'll talk about this. You talked about the mushroom in Christianity, that some people believe that Jesus was a mushroom and it's a psychedelic cult, and that triggers a lot of people. But it's something that I feel that if you don't dive into, like how you're saying, what you believe is A, now what you B is what just contradicts what you're believing. How can you truly know for sure for yourself if you only see it from one point of view, only from side A, right? And that's where the I've had conversations with people with the Gnostics. You know, obviously Yaldabaoth, which is this archetype for Satan, created the material world. And it's like you tell somebody that who's hard, and I was raised Christian Pentecostal, and
I was raised Greek Orthodox, so
and I played guitar for my church for many years, and I went for a long time since I was a little kid. I was raised in it, and just speaking of this heresy, just even till today, it feels wrong. It feels wrong, right? Because it's so many years of indoctrination.
Yes.
And it's when you think outside the box. And I've had people with PhDs in church history and theology on my show, and we've broken down non-canonical scripture and canonical scriptures and things of that nature. And it's like, why does it feel this way to think outside the box? Why are you shamed when you come and think outside the box and you try and talk to somebody about it and they make you feel a certain way? It's like, you ask, I'm just a messenger. How you do your research, you're a historian. I'm just a messenger, dude. I'm just telling you what they believe. Doesn't necessarily mean that I believe it. I have a quote by Aristotle, which I always come to. It says, because I'm open to all ideas, Aristotle says, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. And I believe that's very powerful, because why do people just assume that you believe something as soon as you talk about it? And in my podcast, I talk about all types of things. I know you don't like flat Earth. I did a freaking episode with Mark Sargent on flat Earth.
Dude, that's awesome. That's awesome, though. Like, seriously, yeah. But that's good, though. I'm not like, yeah. Talk to Mark Sargent. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care.
I want to hear his side of the story. I believe that we're on a globe. He has his stories and his things where he believes otherwise, and that's fine, and I respect that, right? I'll respect.
I don't think he believes it. I don't think he believes it. I think that he sees a way to get himself fame, and because every time he's been interviewed by somebody that really presses him about it, he does all these like like all these little kind of, his body language like gives him away all the time. My only problem with him is that I don't truly believe that he believes the world is flat. If he truly believed the world is flat, he wouldn't piss me off at all. I'd be like, okay, you're just an idiot. Like, who cares? You're just another idiot of many. But I think that he's a liar and a deceiver. That's my problem with him.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
Yeah. Again, I mean, I think he's a super cool guy.
Oh yeah, no, I don't think he's a bad. I think that he found a way to get himself some fame and some money, and so he's sticking with it. There was
usually people, when they get into that, Tom, sometimes, I'm saying that's the case with him, it might be, who knows, sometimes it gets away from them and they just have to ride that wave until that happens all the time. People start getting into some, just kidding, haha, and then it's like it blows up, it goes viral or something. They're just like, what do I do now? It's like, well, you gotta stick it out, dude.
Well, but see, that's the thing, is I don't think you should stick it out in that sense, like, because that's being deceptive. Like, so with the holy, I'll give you, here's a perfect example. So Jerry Brown and Julie Brown wrote the Psychedelic Gospels about the mushroom and Christian art. Now, at the time that they wrote the book, I truly believe that they believed there were mushrooms in Christian art. I know that they do not believe that anymore, and yet they got a book to sell, so they push it anyway. And that to me is, I don't like that. Like, if somebody were to demonstrate to me tomorrow that I was wrong in my conclusions in the Witches Ointment that I wrote, I'd change my mind. Just like that. I'd be like, oh, fuck, I was wrong.
Respectfully.
Yeah, just I was wrong.
respectfully and admit you're wrong, but some people have a problem with that.
Well, it's an ego
And
thing. They haven't
yeah,
taken enough mushrooms.
exactly. They need an ego death. So,
Yeah.
what is your experience with entheogens and in specific mushrooms? I know you talk about microdosing. You use it in conjunction with magic. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because when people say magic, it's almost like, from a Christian standpoint,
Sure.
demonic, satanic, and then you did your Witches Ointment thing where I'm curious to if you can talk a little bit about that as well, of what this entity that they were in contact with, because it always seems maybe, and again this is just thinking outside the box, maybe these entities are the aliens that we talk about, that I feel, and from my personal experience, because I told you before, I feel that these substances, and I have a picture of Alex Gray Net of Being on my wall, and I feel that when you take these substances, they put you, my friend calls it tripping interdimensionally.
Yeah,
And
like
and
that.
it does put you in and when I was in that state, when I was in that place, it feels like this knowledge of these, I have very high respect, and I kind of sort of messed up doing it my first time. I kind of wanted to, I only did 2.3 grams, and my buddy told me, "Oh, just start low," and he works at a psilocybin retreat in Jamaica, so he's got experience with it. He
Sure.
said at first he had told me 3.5. Then I talked to another friend of mine. He's like, "No, dude, don't do 3.5. 3.5 is a fucking ride. Do 2.5." I was like, "Great, I'll do 2.5." So I did 2.3, and I was tripping my ass off. I was tripping balls, and it was very overwhelming. I don't consider it a bad trip because I learned a lot about myself from it,
Of course.
but it was a bad trip. It was, I feel like it was very horrible, but I got my friend tells me that the most difficult trips are the most beneficial ones, and you're probably not
Yes.
going to figure it out a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It might make sense to you months or years down the road, but I did it and it did show me a lot and I learned a lot. But I feel like when I was in that realm, they knew that I only wanted to get my toes wet a little bit, and they're like, no, 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 no. Now you're here with us, so let's show you what this is about, right? You wanted to, what your curiosity, right? Curiosity killed the cat. And it's like they took me and they just shit all over me, and it just really it was a roller coaster of a ride, and it was very, very intense to say the least for my very first time doing it.
Sure. I agree with your friend actually that quote unquote bad trips are actually very beneficial. I've never had a bad trip. And I do, upwards of 5+ grams of mushrooms when I sit, and I've never had a bad trip. So I don't I know they exist, but I don't know what that's like. In fact, I had, this was maybe a couple months ago. I ate, ooh, I think it was only an eighth. I think it was 3.5 grams. It wasn't too, I think that's all it was. And Gaia, who I tend to visit often in my psychedelic state, was actually having me put on different masks of bad trips just so that I could see how silly the whole thing was. I mean, she was giving me a mask that when I put it on, I could see all of human devastation. She gave me another mask, and it's like I could see every woman that's ever been raped. She gave me another mask, and it's like every person that's died for a senseless fucking war. And it actually did not. Now, for most people to see that, they would have a bad trip. But I actually, as much as I felt pity for those situations, people dying in war, women getting raped, of course, it didn't actually throw my trip off because I knew that, or at least I felt like I was with this entity that was going to take care of whatever the situation was. And of course, at the end of the day, I don't know if those entities are real. I can't, again, I'm not that creative. I've never, I couldn't invent these things. I
Yeah.
wish I could. I would be a million, dollar selling novelist if I could invent these
That's why I
entities.
believe it's real, Tom.
Yeah,
That's
me
why I
too.
believe it's call it whatever you want to call it. I don't believe that this source should be named and should have this image associated with it. I believe that the source is the universe, right? That it's
Yes.
just a collective consciousness of this of everything together, and that's why you get the gut feeling of like, oh, I had a feeling. Well, that's the universe talking to you. Maybe if that is God, maybe it's. I believe that a lot of people need guidance in life, and if it helps you become a better person, if following the Bible helps you become a better person, then so be it, right? As long as you don't hurt children, which is the main thing,
Hmm.
because again, that's your piece of shit if you do. But as long as it helps you become a better person and guides you in life, then more power to you.
Yeah, like I don't have anything against Christianity. I know that like for a lot of, my fellow witches and magicians are like, oh, Christian. I'm like, why? But you're like, yes, of course, there are some horrible things that the church has done. And I mean,
Yes.
horrible things, of course. But most people that are Christians are really good people. Like
Yes.
they're not out there doing horrible things at all, like practicing Christians, I mean. Same thing with Mormons. I mean, I think that the religion of Mormonism it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, they're all pretty ridiculous, including my own, I should say. But I have a lot of friends that are Mormon or ex-Mormon. They're not anymore because I go on tour a lot and I stop over in Salt Lake City and Utah and everything. They are the nicest, most genuine, giving, and kind people I have ever encountered, bar none. So
Yeah.
whatever their religion is doing, that putting aside, the gold tablets, and the angel Moroni, put all that aside, their religion produces wonderful people, wonderful people. So if you care about society and communities and civilizations, then Mormonism is really not that bad. It's actually a pretty good blueprint for producing decent people. And I'm saying that as somebody who's not a Mormon, who has no more, doesn't believe it, but all my friends that are raised Mormon and are now ex-Mormons, they're still wonderful. They're
Yeah.
and it's the one thing they all have in common is that they're all genuine, they're nice, they're compassionate, and they're charitable. It's amazing what that religion has done for people. And I'm saying that as, somebody who doesn't believe a word of it.
Yeah. Well, the ones that take it to extremes are the ones that give the others bad
Of course,
reps.
yeah, that's all extremism, and I agree with you totally, Juan. It's that's I was one of the things actually my mom would always warn us, my two brothers and myself, against was extremism in any way, shape, or form. And she's Greek Orthodox. She raised me Greek Orthodox, but she also warned me against extremist Christians, at the
Yes.
same time. And it's just like, no, extremism in any capacity. Extremism in psychedelia is not good either. Like just, there has to life is about balance. So if you're
It's
an
about a
extremist in any
balance.
capacity, you're missing a big, big piece of the picture of what it is to be a human.
Yes. Yeah. So when you talk about when you talk about magic, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't, me, I personally believe in evil. I believe in demons and all this stuff. And I don't fuck with occult things. I feel like magic, I don't know in what sense it deals with sort of these things. And I feel we have this filter and if once you start messing with that, that's why I don't fuck with any of it, to be quite honest with you. So
Sure.
what is magic to you? And obviously you use mushrooms in specific for these
Yeah.
rituals. I don't know what you want to call them,
Yeah.
rituals or
No,
spells.
they're rituals. So when I say magic, what I mean is mind hacking. That's what I'm talking about, is that you're learning and witchcraft for that matter. And as I've said, the only difference between a magician and a witch is that magicians tend to wear shoes more often. But that's more of a like there's other philosophical differences, but that's the main difference. We witches tend to be more hippies than anything else. But yeah, it's just mind hacking. Like I don't invoke demons or anything like that. And I do believe I agree with you, Juan. I believe that evil exists
Most
as
definitely.
a force in the universe. I think it does. Maybe it doesn't, but I think it absolutely does. I believe that we live in that kind of dualistic universe where there's that constant pull between good and evil is exactly what creates everything around us. In the same sense that it's, you see a pride of lions attacking an antelope. Well, we might look at that as evil, but that is actually creating community bond between that pride.
It's a circle of life. I was
It's
talking about that. I think it was yesterday where I was watching Lion King with my son, and the Simba was like, "Dad, don't we eat those?" And he's like, "That's just a circle of life." It's like, why are they? Why they're our friends? You're gonna save them, but we eat them. He's like, it's a circle of life, and I talk about that because man, animals have territory. Man never lost anything. Animals have lost territory because of man. So what we do is selfish, and we're taking things that weren't ours to begin with. It was nature's. It was these animals, and that's why they act the way they act, because they have territory. Man doesn't have anything, and we create whatever it is that we want, and we take things that we want. Right? That's why I told you earlier, simulacra is giving this value to things that don't mean anything except what we make of them. That's why I feel that the whole religion thing, it's like this image of X person, it doesn't mean anything. It's a hollow symbol. Behind the symbol, there's no power behind the symbol. It's what we make it to be. And in essence, it turns into that, right? Because of the power we give to it over ourselves. And we start believing in that.
Sure, but it's also, and I agree with you, and you could actually apply the same meaning to letters.
Yes.
Take the letter Q. That doesn't mean anything at all until we give it a form of value.
I think it was, and again, and this isn't the Tartaria stuff, it was going into the origins of the alphabet, how the first alphabet was only 17 letters or something like that, and then we added some other, I believe it was Latin, and I don't know if you've ever come across anything like that.
Well, yeah, because we didn't. So, as just one example of what you are 100% correct. The letter W is not. That is a modern letter that does not exist in Latin at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
no,
we definitely added that.
It comes to show these things that are added throughout history, and again, we make it to be that. So again, back to the magic. You said it was more of hacking of the mind and not actually invoking different spirits. So it's more of, would you call it something for self-improvement? Is that what you use it for? To be able to, I think I was listening to a podcast you were on, you use it to like finish your books.
Yep.
And again, I guess I could see why you use it and how you use it. How I said about the Bible helping people advance and become better person. Maybe that's how you use the same thing. So if let's say we relate this to mushrooms, maybe what helps me on my trip might not help you, but what helps you on your trip might not help me. So it's finding that system, like you said, something that you enjoy at the end of the day, which is powerful. Let's move on to the next question here.
Well, just can I say something real quick on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
But yeah, you are correct, because one of the things that aids in magic is symbols, and there are certain symbols like if you see my altar back here.
Yeah.
This is just filled with symbols right here that mean nothing to anybody else, but damn, do they mean a lot to me? And holy shit, do they enable me to tap into parts of my mind, to pull from just the recesses of my subconscious ideas that I want to manifest in this world.
Yeah,
so I just wanted to get that out.
Yeah, no, I'm a firm believer in the law of attraction. And again, that's why I hint towards the simulation theory. So I found it very interesting. You came up with these 5 different terms that you dubbed to explain the use of certain substances. So we're going to start working our way into the religion aspect of things. Can you explain your 5 different terms for the entheogens? That way, when we start talking about them, you can talk about them in that context. There's 5. You have extheogen, somtheogenic, and correct me if I'm wrong, pytheogenic, is that how you say it?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Poetogen and mysteogen. Can you talk a little bit about those? I found that very interesting.
Sure. So when I was writing my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, my second book in psychedelic history, I came across a bunch of accounts that did not sound entheogenic. Entheogenic, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know this, but for the few that might not, entheogen means generating divinity from within. It's based on an early Greek word, enthusiasmos, which just means religious ecstasy. Now, the thing is, when you look at some of these ancient sources, sometimes you find somebody using a spirit plant or a plant medicine or whatever you want to call it, but they're not actually generating divinity within themselves. They're generating a kind of mystical state of awareness that doesn't have anything to do with bringing the godly into the self. So, for example, the first one you said was extheogenic. So if entheogen means generating divinity within, extheogen means generating divinity from without. Because when you read some of these sources and you have people that are talking to these different entities, right? Just like we do on mushrooms or ayahuasca or anything. Well, we're not generating that divinity inside ourselves if you believe those entities are real. If you don't believe they're real, then that's entheogenic. If you do believe that they're real, that's extheogenic. Like your friend, the interdimensional, what did he call that?
Interdimensional tripping.
Yes, interdimensional tripping. And the entities you meet would qualify, at least by my understanding, something extheogenic. Now, the next one I believe you said was somnotheogenic. You said somniogenic. It's weird because that word, when I first wrote it, I said somniogenic as well, because that means generating divinity, generating divinity in sleep. And I changed it. It's a minor nuance in the Latin language to somnotheogenic, which means generating divinities in dreams. So, as one example, the wise women that I write about in the Witches Ointment, they would take these psychoactive plants to knock themselves into a lucid dream state. Now, if you were to ask a medieval
that's mandrake, right? Sorry to interrupt.
Mandrake, yes, yeah, mandrake was definitely one of them. That's a real. I use mandrake myself for similar purposes. Don't do that, kids. It is highly poisonous, and you can kill yourself. Do not use mandrake.
Don't use mandrake.
Yeah, I just stick to the safe, illegal stuff like mushrooms and ayahuasca. Because mandrake's totally illegal, but you can kill yourself. Anyway, so if you were to ask a medieval wise woman, are you having an entheogenic experience? In my opinion, she would say no, because I'm not, like, that entity is real. That goddess that I'm talking to is a real entity that I'm meeting in the dream realm. So that for me is somnotheogenic. The next one you said was pytheogen. Yes. Pytheogen is using psychedelics for magical purposes. And this could be anything from simply putting a hex on somebody. In the early 1400s, there was a wise woman living in Todi, Italy, named Matuccia de Francesca La Striga de Casarepe Bianca. And one of her most popular spells was to sell some kind of psychoactive. We don't know what it was, but we know it was psychoactive. She would sell a psychoactive to abused housewives. And what these wives would do is they would slip this plant, substance, whatever it was, into their husband's dinner, wait about 45 minutes or an hour just as it starts to kick in their husband, the plant medicine, and then they would say an incantation over him. So while this husband was cowering in the corner, like experiencing vertigo and, sweating, maybe vomiting and, having hallucinations of demons and whatnot, he would think that his wife was doing this because of the incantation, and that anytime she said this incantation, he would have these experiences. And that caused many an abusive asshole to behave himself later in life. He wouldn't abuse her anymore. That's entheogenic magic.
That's really wild, and this is why all this fascinates me, because what you're saying there, these incantations. I have a buddy of mine who's done ayahuasca numerous times, and he says when these shamans, he calls them Icaros, where they sing
Yeah.
these different
Yeah.
things. Obviously, there's a purging Icaros, there's an Icaros for driving away bad spirits, and it's crazy because when you're in that realm, and he says that when the shaman starts doing this purging Icaros, there's a bunch of people all vomiting all at the same time, and it's like, what are the chances that everybody's going to start vomiting and purging all at the same time? It's because this shaman, they each have their own different Icaros, which was very fascinating.
Yeah, and exactly. And that's one of those things that, like, I'm glad you said that, because that's one of those things that it's like, yeah, there's no way nobody made that up. Like, there's nobody, like,
the plants showed it to them.
What's
that?
that?
The plants showed it to them.
Yes.
He says that the shamans, they will do these rituals or ceremonies where they go in and they just, I don't know what they do, but because he asked one of his shaman friends, he said, why do they all sound different? He goes, because the plants taught them that particular day that song in their own way. And that's why I say that these sacred plants are just collective knowledge, and I feel like they show us just the knowledge from the beginning of the whatever this is, because they talking about mushrooms, fungi spores. They say they can survive in space. Maybe we are a failed plant experiment, and they use us to spread their seed. Who knows, right? Like that could be a thing. It's
totally
very
possible.
Very wild.
It's totally. Again, I don't think aliens built the pyramids, but it's foolish to think that we are the only conscious life in the entire universe. That's
the Fermi's paradox. And on this Tuesday, this upcoming week, I'm doing a show with Dr. Michael P. Masters, where he's an anthropology. He's got a PhD in evolution and anthropology and all these different crazy, just a guy who's way more versed than I am. And he wrote a book that we are aliens, just time traveling back from another time to study ourselves, just how an archaeologist would study bones. And again, that's why I say maybe, who knows, right? And at this moment, I'm open to everything because I know nothing.
Yeah.
Right? But I make these decisions for myself. And again, it's just, keep your mind open enough, but not so open that your brain falls out.
Yeah. You're a Michael Shermer fan?
I've never looked into his work.
Oh, that's his line is to.
Well, I got
keep
that
an open mind, but what's that?
I got that from Michael P. Masters, from his book. I don't know if he was quoting him or not.
He was probably. That's Michael Shermer's line.
Yeah. So probably.
But anyway, whatever. But okay, sorry, sure.
Poetogen is the next one.
Yes, Poetogen. So, most people. Everybody I know, but I don't want to say everybody, because who knows, there could be, somebody out there that disagrees, but most people would agree that psychedelics ignite the creative imagination. And yet, what is the word for that? This is something that we all take for granted, and there was no word for it. So I came up with Poetogen, which is using psychedelics to generate the creative spirit.
Yes. And to touch back on the insomniogen, is that what you call it, or somniogen?
Somnotheogen. I know, it's a pain in the ass. Yeah.
Where you talked about how people use that to invoke divinity. Gnosis, which is I believe is another Latin word, right?
Gnosis is a Greek word.
The Gnostics and gnosis, the knowledge used to achieve self-divinity. And I want to talk to you about this as well, where in Christianity, they were open to using such things as cannabis. And one thing that I found very interesting was that they talk about King Solomon, obviously how God visited him in his dreams is because he was using some form of cannabis that supposedly they found in a tomb that was supposed to be his. And they found traces of cannabis, and maybe he wasn't actually talking to God, and he was having this experience because of these psychoactive substances, plants.
Or both. Or he was talking to God because he was using psychoactive, which is would be my interpretation.
Yeah, or both.
Yeah, like the burning bush.
Yes, the acacia. Supposedly it was acacia, which has high in
Yes.
DMT, and that's another thing I've been kind of wanting to go into. The when he tells him, if they ask you who sent you, just say I am that I am, or something. I think that's what he was saying, and is like, what does that mean? Is it that we are the gods, or you know what I mean? Like how you're talking about creating this divinity on the outside, which is very interesting. The last one, mysteogen.
So mysteogen just means generating epiphany. So in the ancient world, in different mystery religions, like the Rites of Eleusis is just a very famous example. They would use, I believe, and the jury's still out on this, but I believe that they were using opium to generate these visions of Persephone rising from the dead at the Rites of Eleusis. So a mysteogen is just the use of a psychedelic to generate epiphany, like when you're when you're on 2 grams of mushrooms or 10 grams of mushrooms or a tab of acid or whatever, all of a sudden, everything just makes sense. All of a sudden, you're making these connections from this, that, and you're just seeing the web and how everything is actually interconnected. That's a mysteogenic experience.
Yes, it's just like string theory, or like the Stoics that believed in this web of cause and effect.
Yes.
And the logos, right? The logos to the Stoics was a cause of nature, the universe doing its thing. Logos to the Christians is this personal thing that they consider God, this personal relationship with it, versus the Stoics, which was a distant thing that they couldn't control. They just did good and did right by everybody, and as long as you did good, then you were all right. That's why it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
So what has your research led you to believe in regard to the origins of religions? And again, because I talk about a lot of ancient civilizations and different cultures where a lot of these cultures regarded these substances as sacred. You talked about the Egyptians earlier. They used the lotus, I believe it was the blue lotus, to make teas.
And opium and mushrooms and cannabis.
Yes.
And mandrake.
So they regarded these states of higher consciousness as sacred. Obviously, they had their own shamans, and only certain people would be able to go into those certain states. What has your research led you to believe? Do you believe that, again, we've talked about this metaphysical, is it things that we've come up with ourselves in our minds because the brain is a crazy thing? And what has your research led you to believe that the origins of this are?
Sure. So I go over this in my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions. I believe it's the 3rd chapter. I don't remember which chapter. It's either the 2nd or 3rd chapter. But I'm kind of a psychedelic heretic in that I don't believe that psychedelics kicked off the religious impulse. I believe that the religious impulse evolved eons before we were eating mushrooms and smoking cannabis and drinking opium and doing all that stuff. And I believe that because there are religious experiences that happen today in people that have never so much as taken a sip of alcohol. So there has to be something intrinsic to the human condition, or maybe not even intrinsic, but certainly evolved over time. And I give in my book, my ideas about how that might have happened. I think that, it's so difficult because I don't think psychedelics or entheogenic plants kicked off the religious impulse, but I do believe that entheogenic plants confirmed the religious impulse, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. When we talked that they put you in these different realms, maybe it was something that was always there. We just weren't able to tap into it until we started diving into these realms. And it's like, what? And that's another thing. We're not supposed to be there, right? I feel that our minds aren't supposed to be there. And that's why it's so hard for us to grasp what's happening when you have
I think that's your Christian upbringing. I believe we are supposed to be. No,
You think so?
I think it's one of those, like you were saying before, those holdovers where we kind of like we no longer like I no longer go to church. I haven't gone to church in years, and yet every now and then I'll feel a little guilty about jerking off on a Sunday. Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm saying. So I see it more that way, I guess. I think that the religious impulse was always there, or not maybe always there. But I believe that Neanderthals actually they've uncovered in caves like burial, like evidence of what we would call a burial or funeral ceremony. Well, that's religion right there. And
yeah, that's very interesting. I've never heard of that, because Neanderthals are looked at as like these primitive apes, pretty much these brutes.
They
and
weren't.
Yet, do you subscribe to Terence McKenna's? They call it a theory, but it's a hypothesis. The stoned ape theory.
Thank you for differentiating between the stoned ape hypothesis. Thank you for that. No, I don't subscribe to it at all. Now, let me say that if you were to fast forward like 2 or 3 centuries, I believe that you could see the stoned ape hypothesis in what's known as the Mesolithic age. So we don't really talk about the Mesolithic age. Like everybody knows about the Paleolithic age. Everybody knows about the Neolithic age. Nobody ever talks about the Mesolithic age, which is right between the Paleolithic and the Neolithic. Mm-hmm. And I think that you can see the influence of psychedelic plants on culture in the Mesolithic age. Like, for example, the Tassili caves in eastern Algeria, which show the famous, it's called the bee shaman.
The mushroom shaman, the little mushrooms all over him.
Yeah. And I go over this again in Psychedelic Mystery Traditions. The thing that's interesting about that image that I don't think has gotten enough press or attention that is really significant is that the art of the Tassili caves actually went through 5 different periods of evolutionary artistic development. The first stage was the Bubulus stage. The second stage was the Roundhead stage. The third was the Pastoral. The fourth was the Equine, and the fifth was the Cameline. Now, let's go back to the Roundhead period, because that's where the bee shaman, for lack of a better term, pops up. That's the Mesolithic age. And if you look at from the Bubulus stage, which was the first stage, and then the Pastoral and Equine and Cameline stage, with the Roundhead in between the two, kind of sandwiched in between the two, all of a sudden the art becomes incredibly more developed and incredibly more aesthetic, and there's just so much more to it. And it's like, well, wait a minute, here we have no mushrooms and it's just etchings on a cave wall. Then we have mushrooms, and now we have these really abstract paintings.
Yeah.
And when you look at it in the full context, I think that a really good case can be made for mushrooms. And it's not just the Tassili. There's also a Bego Mount in southern France that clearly shows an Amanita muscaria carved right into the cave wall. There's also in I believe, and don't quote me on this because I don't remember where, but I believe it's southeast in Spain. You have other mushroom cave images. And right after this, you start to see these little statues of what's called the poppy goddess. And she was found all over the Mediterranean. It's like, well, wait a minute. We went from scrawling on these walls to creating these statues of opium. And when I say scrolling on walls, we went from scrolling mushroom images on walls to agriculture, to advanced art, to civilization, to building buildings. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So I believe, in answer to your question, if you take McKenna's stoned ape hypothesis and get it out of biological evolution, because there are far better explanations. There's a great book called Sapiens. I highly recommend to your listeners. I forget the author's name, but this book explains way better how humans evolved than the stoned ape hypothesis. But if you bring the stoned ape hypothesis out of the Paleolithic age, which is where McKenna had it, and into the Mesolithic age, you have a solid case.
Makes sense now. Yeah, thank you for explaining that, because I would have never thought of it from that point, from that aspect. Because again, I'm not a historian and I'm not well versed in this, and this is why I bring people on like you to clear things up and clear the air for me. But I can't imagine. You talk about these cave paintings, how they get more sophisticated and more beautiful over time.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it. Let's fast forward. You can see it in architecture around the world, where you see certain architecture that looks almost sort of like a DMT breakthrough, where they're just fractals and just craziness and beautiful work.
Especially Islamic architecture.
Islamic, yes. There's some
Islamic architecture.
Very beautiful work, and it's like, wow, that looks crazy. Well, it kind of sort of looks like the net of being.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So they were getting high off the acacia bush too. And There you go. And they were just seeing the fractals everywhere, man.
So in Christianity, we talked about the King Solomon perhaps using cannabis, and maybe the god was a god to him, and he was creating these scenarios. That you said you've talked about the use of cannabis or forms of it. Can you speak on that? And then obviously a little bit about the uses of entheogens in Christianity, if they did not use mushrooms, how some people think, which I think it's John Marco Allegro, the book, The Holy Mushroom and the Cross.
Mushroom and the Cross.
The Sacred Mushroom. I'm in the middle of that book. I haven't finished it, I'll be honest. And again, I'm not buying everything. They say Santa Claus, Amanita Muscaria. You have Hamilton Morris, people like him who talk about it, and his show Pharmacopoeia. Again, it's a lot of different things. I people tell me, "Oh, you're really smart." I go, "No. I just remember things and I connect dots when I can. I'm not coming up with any of this. It's just information that I'm just regurgitating back to people, and I just happen to remember it." I like your analogy that you use, because you said it was, people say, "Oh, well, they hid it. They hid it in this sacred art, and they hid the halo. It might have been the spores of a mushroom and all this stuff." And it's like, I like the analogy you use about fast food, about how is it that we're so open about it, the open use of cannabis, and I don't know which other ones which you can go into, but then we would hide Taco Bell, but we have Burger King, McDonald's, and it's like, "Oh, but did you hear about Taco Bell?" And it's like, what?
Oh no, they covered up Taco Bell.
Yeah, exactly.
Covered it up. You see, you have to understand, Juan, in the 21st century, everybody ate fast food. They ate McDonald's, and they ate Wendy's, and they ate Burger King, and they ate In-N-Out Burger, and they ate Sonic, but nobody talked about Taco Bell. It is the stupidest, idiotic idea in all of psychedelia that Christians were hiding mushrooms in their art. It's just dumb, and people need to stop saying it, because it makes us all look ridiculous.
What was it, Tom? Because to me, it looks like a mushroom. What could it have been?
So it's funny you should say that. So a colleague and a very good friend of mine, Rob Dickens, who was the editor-in-chief at Psychedelic Press U.K., once made a very witty remark about that. He said, "Yeah, look at all those mushrooms. Isn't it odd that they never drew trees? If all those are mushrooms, where are the trees?" What it comes down to is that people, when they look at Christian art today, don't actually know what they're looking at. They have no idea what they're looking at. Because
that's with everything in life. That's with everything in life.
Well, unless you study it.
Yes.
And for people, for art historians, the mushroom in Christian art is a joke. We drink beer and we laugh at it. That's because that's all it's worth. So let's say this. Picture a tree in your head, right? Mm-hmm. Now, outline that tree. Just mentally make an outline of that tree. Kind of looks like a mushroom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
The shape, like a nuclear bomb cloud looks like a mushroom. It's like
exactly. So obviously, Christians painted mushrooms in their art, anticipating nuclear war that would bring on the apocalypse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because that mushroom clouds, it looks just like a mushroom, so obviously that's what's going on, right? But these are the kind of for lack of a better way of putting it, dumbass ideas a person has to have in their head in order to think there are mushrooms in Christian art. It's absolutely ridiculous. Christians wrote openly about cannabis. They wrote openly about mandrake. There's a Christian source, I believe it's from 1160 or thereabouts of the Common Era, that is literally this entire Christian mystery symbolic rite using mandrake. So why would they do that with mandrake and not mention?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is there talks about it as well in the Book of Genesis? The use of mandrake, or did I hear that wrong?
Yes, yeah, the Song of Songs, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, and also Leia's mandrake. I believe that's what you're thinking about. Excuse me, Leia's mandrake. Of course, yeah. They were literally in the Old Testament. They don't just talk about mandrake. They talk about mandrake in a sex magic context.
In the Bible.
In the Bible. The Song of Songs, they talk about mandrake in a sex magic. You have two areas of the Torah that talk about mandrake's use in sex magic.
Wow.
But they covered up a mushroom? It doesn't make, it's just, again, it's
it
like
wasn't illegal. It wasn't illegal.
Yeah, none of this stuff was illegal. The idea that you would cover up a mushroom in the ancient world is as silly as saying that we would cover up Taco Bell today. There's nothing illegal about Taco Bell. Why would anybody cover this up?
Yeah, that's very interesting. But yet these people wrote a whole book on it, and
many books have been written on it, and it's just complete horseshit. And I mean, it's sad because there's so much real psychedelic history in the world. And it's like, there's so much real Christian. In my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, I have 3 chapters on how Christians use psychedelics. 3. They wrote openly about this stuff. The problem is all of these people writing these bullshit books about mushrooms in Christian art, they can't read Latin. They can't read Old German or Old Spanish or Old French or Old Italian. So because they're ignorant of language, they say, oh, it was covered up. But if you can actually read the languages, you would say, holy shit, they didn't cover anything up.
That could be also a contribution of misinformation because I got this again from Michael's book. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Is that also?
But that's just what people say when they have. It's just a cheeky way of saying I have no evidence. Like it's simple. Walk into a court of law as a lawyer and say to the judge, "Well, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence." Your client is going to prison because no educated person, I mean, we give concessions because most people are nice. I'm not, so I don't go by that at all. I'm a real asshole.
Yeah.
So I don't do the, if there's no evidence for it, maybe it happened, but
until you come up with something.
Well, but it's not just that there's no evidence to the holy mushroom hypothesis. It's that there is a barrage of counter evidence against it.
So, on the topic of mushrooms, Santa Claus was not an Amanita muscaria. He wasn't tripping balls when he had the flying reindeer, and so that's out of the question.
Well, so yes, it's out of the question. And let's just take a few examples. You mentioned the flying reindeer.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the problem with our idea of the flying reindeer, that imagery being based off of reindeer getting high off the Amanita muscaria, right? Here's the big problem. When reindeer first enter the Christmas story in America, they don't fly. The reindeer are literally a part of Christmas tradition for almost a century before they actually fly.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but Christmas comes from, and again, this is just things that I've looked into, the tradition, the holiday of Saturnalia, a Roman holiday.
It doesn't come from it, but it's certainly ripped off elements of Saturnalia.
Yes.
Like there's no, like the idea of goodwill towards your fellow human, peace on earth, good tidings and great joy. All of that is Saturnalia.
Gift giving, the color, some of the colors.
All of it.
The reason
evergreen, the prominence of the evergreen tree, that's all Saturnalia, and not just Saturnalia. All pagan winter festivals were like this.
Yeah, so I bring up Saturnalia because I talk about the different archetypes throughout history, and Kronos, Saturn, Satan, Moloch, all these are the same archetype. And again, at the end of the day, these people were, again, maybe sacrificing a higher entity, if you want to call it Satan or not. That's why I bring that up.
Well, I would argue, and maybe I'm wrong, but you had brought up earlier the Gnostic Yaldabaoth. I think Satan was actually based off Yaldabaoth, not Saturn.
Oh yes. Again, the archetype, and
the archetype.
The archetype, because again, that's the thing about all of this, that it's all the same thing, just different names.
I misunderstood what you were saying. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. But yeah, so Yaldabaoth, which was the what is it? The Jewish Yahweh. That's why a lot of, and the more I look into it, the more I believe it, that these Gnostic groups, they believed that the Old Testament was the work of demonic beings, because you have the whole child sacrifice, this righteous, jealous God killing, and then it was like, oh, just kidding, they'll wait till the very last second. Oh, just kidding. And it's very,
JK.
JK. It's very weird and dark. And when I talk to people about that, people who are in the church, they're just like, God works in mysterious ways, and I go, sure, because that's the thing, right? They always rebuttal it with something like, oh, he's all powerful, he can do whatever he wants. And it's like, how can you argue with that, right? How can you argue with somebody who always has you talk about conspiracy theories, they always feel like they know everything, and they always have a rebuttal for whatever you say, a counter argument for whatever you say. And that's how I feel about it, but it is what it is.
Yeah, but it's also tautological, because if somebody says, well, that's how God works in mysterious ways, it's like, well, then how do you know that if it's mysterious? That's the response to that, by the way.
Yeah. Well, so you also talk about the use of cannabis. Can you tell me the name of the guy who, before starting a sermon, he would light up the stalk of cannabis?
Macarius.
Yes. And then what other entheogens did they use? You said mandrake, cannabis. Opium. Do you believe they use opium?
Oh, yeah, we have written evidence for opium.
Do you believe they use mushrooms? Do you believe that they were?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have no qualms at all with the idea that Christians were eating mushrooms. I have a big problem with the idea that they were painting it in art. We're talking about a span of 2,000 years. People have been eating mushrooms all over the world since even before Christianity. There's nothing to suggest that people did not continue to eat mushrooms, especially converting pagans into the Christian faith. They would have brought their mushrooms into it. Of course they would have, because religions are loose like that. I mean, look, it's the same thing today. Like, you have somebody that's like, they'll say that they're a diehard Christian, but they also cheat on their taxes and cheat on their wife, and so it's like,
only when it's convenient.
Yeah, they're buffet style Christianity, and that's been the case forever. And especially if you have people that are part and parcel of a pagan tradition that have grown up with these substances and used them their whole life, of course they're going to bring them into Christianity. And Jewish people were using them too. I mean, you wouldn't even need converting pagans because of cannabism, which is what cannabis, that's what the Jews called cannabis, was cannabism. That's also in the Old Testament.
Yes, and when we talked about the Gnostics, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think his name is Epiphanius. Jesus, I can't talk. Epiphanius, was he the one that criticized the Gnostics because he said that they were doing orgies and all this magic?
Irenaeus was one of them. Epiphanius was another. Eusebius was another. Yeah, there was a bunch of them that were doing that. And guys like Epiphanius and guys like Irenaeus, I mean, they literally write in their slanders against Gnostics, they're using psychedelics. People, don't you see that this is but it wasn't that they were using psychedelics that was the problem. It was that they were using psychedelics for let's take one example. There was a guy named Marcus who was a 2nd century Valentinian Gnostic. He used psychedelic potions during his rites, but he wasn't using them to worship Jesus or the Christian God. He was using them to worship Charis, the goddess of grace. So it wasn't so much that the psychedelic was the problem, it's how he was using it that was the problem.
Yes. the set, what we call the intention when you take these substances, because that's very important. So moving on to my next question, and you talk about the use of these psychedelics, these substances in certain secret societies or cults. It makes me think of the movie Midsummer, where they're using psychedelics and it's a cult and they're using it in this weird way to do these rituals and stuff. Have you seen that movie Midsummer?
No, sounds great though.
Yes, check it out. It's very dark, very
Right.
dark, and yeah, it's Midsomar, Midsomar, if you want to.
Midsommar. Got it.
Yeah. I don't know how to say it. That's probably how you say it, but it's very. I believe it's on Prime Video. You'd have to look it up, but
Okay, I'll definitely look it up.
they use the. I think they were using psilocybin because that's how when they did the visuals, that's what it looked like to me. So you're talking about these people, and this is something I've also come up with from research. I'll even go as far. So there's what are your thoughts? The question is, what are your thoughts on the correlation between these higher entities and these substances? Because obviously, maybe we do come up with it in our brains, which I believe, or maybe we're put in different realms, which is, again, I believe that aspect. I'm sorry, that's what I believe, that we're put in different realms and we can see these things that we wouldn't normally see. And I'll go even as far to say that the Knights Templar and their supposed worship of Baphomet entities, which, again, through these entities, and we talked about aliens, maybe these entities are the aliens that give these people knowledge of things that they're able to achieve, like how they say at the Knights Templar when they were talking to Baphomet, he gave them the tools through alchemic means to create the modern day banking system, which is how we get the modern day credit system and interest and all that stuff. That was created by them, and that's how they were able to acquire all these riches and be powerful for a very long time. And again, that's part of the Catholic Church. That's something that a lot of people don't talk about. But the Knights Templar were worshiping other entities. I don't know if it was through the use of substances. I haven't heard that aspect of it. But I'll go even as far as saying that these entities that they were talking to, perhaps they were through these psychoactive substances.
Oh yeah, I mean it's totally possible. My very good friend and colleague Chris Bennett wrote a book called Liber 420, and he gets really deep into the Templar stuff with psychedelics.
What's it called?
Liber 420.
I'm gonna have to look that up. And he talks about their uses of psychedelics.
Oh yeah, he's big into that. I don't think personally that the evidence is conclusive on it. I think they might have been. My take on the Templars is that they came back worshiping Allah, and that was what the problem was. That they were actually digging into Muslim ideas, Islamic ideas.
Really, that's very interesting.
Yeah, because there was one of the names, and I wish I could remember what it was. I'm searching for, and I don't remember, but one of the names of the entity that the Knights Templars detractors said they were worshiping sounds like Mohammed.
Oh, Baphomet.
Well, that's, yeah, sure.
They say it's they say it's, it can be translated to
it can be,
Mohammed.
yeah,
Yes,
Baphomet,
yes,
yeah,
I have heard that.
That's Mohammed.
Yes.
So I'm more of that persuasion. Now that doesn't mean they weren't using psychoactives to worship Baphomet at all. I just, again, it's not what I have found looking through Christian history is that it's never the psychedelic that gets condemned. It's always how it's used that gets condemned. Like the very theologians that were condemning wise women for using mandrake and henbane and belladonna were using mandrake and henbane themselves. They were just using it to worship Jesus, so it was okay, whereas these wise women were using it to worship fertility goddesses, which was not okay.
Yes, and again, the reason all these substances fascinate me is because everything that happens in the body is a chemical reaction, right? Our feelings, our thoughts, our vision, they're either chemical reactions or electrical signals. And these substances alter that in a way that puts you, again, in another dimension and able to interact with these intelligent entities. And I can't imagine how these primates back then, like that, throwing out the Terrence McKenna thing, how they would have felt if they did pick this mushroom that was psychoactive, fresh, right? They're hungry, hunters and gatherers, and they just eat it. Can you imagine how that primate must have felt like a god, and he's just
Probably
tripping
first
balls.
be really freaked out, and then I would say that after the experience, they were just like, yeah, they probably. You know what it's like to eat mushrooms. You're glowing after it. It's like it's like you just got laid by the creator of the whole universe. It's amazing.
Yeah. So again, to wrap up here, I talk a lot about. I know you are well versed in the New Testament. I talk about the mystical comprehension of things and the literal comprehension of things, how obviously in the Dark Ages, religion was used very literal and people believed it to a T. Obviously, we know how that turned out. And then I talk about the book Revelations where and I want to get your input on this, the 666 mark of the beast, which obviously what's happening in times now, how they're talking about some sort of thing that they're going to put on us. How that symbolized Nero and the Roman Empire, the infamous, Roman Emperor Nero and the Roman Empire, and the seven-headed dragon was the seven emperors of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that if that is true, because a lot of these people, we talk about the symbolism, we have to pay attention to the symbolism, but some people, if you get lost in the symbology, you lose the interpretation, the meaning of it. And if this is true, because gematria, the practice of Hebrew having values, if you really dig into it, that's what it's supposed to be. Because he can't come out and say, John, the author of this book, can't come out and say, hey, Nero's a piece of shit, whatever. Because if you really think about what was happening in that point in time, they were prosecuting and killing people, Christians, and that's what he was talking about. And if that is true, it would discredit almost the entire book and perhaps the entire religion, because God's been coming since I was like 8 years old, and he's still, I'm about to be 26 this week, this upcoming week, and he's still not here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
oh, what?
Go ahead.
Oh no, what were you gonna say? So,
yeah. So I'm gonna get into the medieval. We already talked about this, the depictions of mushrooms, which is up for interpretation. Again, if you take it literally, maybe it might have been something else.
well, no, one of the problems with that is that we can actually look at medieval art books, for example, from the Winchester School, which is in England, where a lot of that kind of zany looking tree actually comes from, and 100% of the time they're called trees.
I got you. Yeah, but again, it's like an Abydos in Egypt, where there are depictions of supposed spaceships and a boat and a airplane and like some crazy thing, but it's just where the Egyptians would fill in hieroglyphs, and they would mark on top of other hieroglyphs and fill it in and fill it in, and it was just over time it coming apart, and it looks like that because that's what we know it to be. It wasn't necessarily that, but
yeah,
you know what I
it's
mean?
what we recognize. And again, it's the same thing. Like, we're psychonauts, so when we see something that could kind of be mushroomy in shape, we default to mushroom. But the people living in those days, they didn't think. Most people living in medieval times were just trying to eke by a loaf of bread to survive. They were not thinking about, most common people, they were not thinking about eating mushrooms for, godlike experiences. Of course, there were probably people doing that. We have zero evidence of it, but I think it's ridiculous to assume that nobody was eating mushrooms at that time. That's just absurd.
We want to believe it because it sounds cool, right?
Yeah, and we want to believe it because it sounds cool. And one of the things about there's a whole psychology behind conspiracy theory. The world is very chaotic. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And what conspiracy theory does, it allows you to make sense of the world. It puts chaos into a neat little package. But the truth is, no, the world is just chaotic. It's not a neat little package for anybody. So,
dare I say that's the same thing as religion?
yeah.
So I've enjoyed this a lot, Tom. One last question for you before we wrap this up. how has your research influenced your views on life, religion, everything, and what is next? You have a book coming out when?
It'll be out May of next year, May 2021.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm gonna actually take a look at what was it, the history of psychedelic practices. Was that the one?
What's that?
Which is your book? The one,
Psychedelic Mystery Traditions.
Psychedelic Mystery. Yeah, I'm gonna probably check that one out because again, I didn't read any of your work. I watched your YouTube videos and I listened to other podcasts you were on and some of your lectures as well.
Sure.
But yeah, how has this changed your views on everything? Do you believe it to be all fake, or do you believe,
So, how it's changed my view is that I actually used to believe that there were mushrooms in Christian art, as just a starter. I used to believe, so there's, and I guess I get in with this. There were two spheres of psychedelic history. The first sphere was written by very intelligent people who were not historians. Guys like John Marco Allegro, Dennis McKenna, Paul Stamets, Albert Hoffman, Gordon Wasson. All very smart in their field. None of them actually historians. None of them actually applied the critical historical methods that historians use to determine what is probably true and what is not. Now, the second sphere is being written today by guys like Danny Nemu, Rob Dickens, who I mentioned, Kerry Rowberry, Erica Dick, Chris Bennett, who I mentioned, myself, Mike J. And we're actually using critical historical methods to detect where did that first sphere get everything wrong. So I used to believe all of the ideas of the first sphere, that mushrooms in Christian art, the stoned ape hypothesis, that women were masturbating with broomsticks with their ointments. None of those things are probably true. And that's how my research, it's really, if you're open-minded enough to change your mind, which I believe that I am, you're gonna have to do a 180 in life. And it's just like that. Now, one of the things some people do, like Jerry Brown, who wrote the Psychedelic Gospels, is that every time some counter evidence comes his way, he just either ignores it. 90% of the time he ignores it. The other 10% of the time, he just dances around it. That is not, you stop being a scholar at that point, and you become an ideologue. And one of the problems is that these ideas have been so ingrained in our culture that you are considered to be a crazy person, like I'm considered to be a crazy person, for questioning it. Because again, if you were to Google any of this nonsense, it'll all come up as being true. Again, nothing against Google, but it's just that first sphere of psychedelic history has had a lot of influence. And because people today don't really have original ideas, they just kind of rewrite other people's articles. And so what happens is, if you were to, Google, was Santa based on a mushroom, you're going to see 100 articles that all say yes, but all they were doing was rewriting whatever that first article said. And that article was wrong.
Sounds like the Gospels in the Bible.
And then I want to just got to say one last thing. My colleague, who I'm actually writing a show that we're going to be shopping to Netflix as soon as coronavirus is over, not to bring it up, he calls it the citation circle jerk. It's everybody's just citing everybody, jerking themselves off, inflating their egos. Nobody's actually checking to see if that first guy was actually right. That's what I do. That's what Chris Bennett does. That's what Kerry Rowberry does. That's what Danny Nemu does. That's what the second sphere of psychedelic historian is doing. We're going back and we're saying, well, wait a minute. Before we all start jerking each other off in the citation circle here, was the original guy even on point? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no.
Yeah, I was saying that it's like the Gospels in the Bible, where they're writing the same thing based on the original ones, and they're going back and just adding things, and it's like they never fact check. It's very true what you're saying. It's going in this circle, talking about the same thing, just wording it differently every single time, and it's like, oh, I came up with this. No, you didn't. You're just saying what the other guy said. Yeah,
of course. Luke and Matthew are complete rip-offs of the Gospel of Mark, and neither one of them actually went back to see if Mark was right.
Exactly. One more thing before we because I want to go on air and say that I was wrong about something uh, to an extent about the Bavarian purity law of 1516. Is it because I've again I'll go out and say it. I've talked about it on the show where the church found out about these people meeting God through the use of beer and drinking. And when they found out, that's when they passed the law in 1516. Is that not true,
That
Tom?
is not
From
true at all.
Okay.
Yeah, it had nothing to do. The Reinheitsgebot, which is the Bavarian beer law. What it came down to was this: there was just a shortage of different kinds of wheat and grains that only that and so you had this competition and this fighting between beer makers and bakers and pastry chefs and bread makers. So that law was put in place to just say, oh no, you guys can use this, you guys use this, you guys use this, you guys use this. That's it. Doesn't say anything about psychoactives in the law. Nothing.
But they probably were meeting God through drinking beer then.
Oh, they were. So today we have, okay, you've heard of a Pilsner?
Mm-hmm.
Pilsner is based off of the German word Pilsen, which is their word for henbane. So Pilsenkraut just means henbane herb beer. And we've retained that the same way I'm sure you and your listeners know that Coca-Cola used to contain cocaine.
Yeah.
That's why it's called Coca-Cola. Even though it doesn't have cocaine anymore, we've retained the name. Same thing with Pilsners. They retained the name of henbane because people were putting mushrooms in their beers. They were putting opium in their beers. They were putting mandrake in their beers. Absolutely, but that's not why the law was put in place. Everybody was putting enhancements in their beers. Even the guys that wrote the Reinheitsgebot were doing this. Like, you know what I mean? They didn't care about psychoactive. There was no like that was the first actual law about this stuff, and it had nothing to do with psychoactives at all. Nobody cared. It wasn't, it would be, again, it's just like saying that in 2020, it was perfectly legal to eat Burger King, perfectly legal to eat Wendy's, but you had to go to an underground cult to enjoy Taco Bell.
Yeah.
Doesn't make, it's just, it's ridiculous. It's just, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'll just go out and say that I was wrong and I talked about it one time. Shout
Yeah,
out to
but
Paul
that's not your fault. That's Paul Stamets' fault because
Yeah.
the problem is, and that's one of the problems with psychedelic celebrityism. Look, I like Paul Stamets. I think he's a brilliant mycologist, but he knows about as much of history as I know about mycology, which is to
Yeah.
say not much at all.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, that's why I say I regurgitate information that I hear. And sometimes it's like playing telephone. You get it wrong. Sometimes you don't. But if the original source was wrong, then you're going to be wrong no matter what because you're not fact check. I can't check them. So, Tom, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this. I love talking about this sort of thing and learning new ideas and new things about history, which is very interesting because there is a correlation here between. I feel there's a correlation between the how Nikola Tesla said, as soon as we find the correlation between the physical and non-physical phenomenon, we'll advance. And it's very real. And again, that's what quantum physics is trying to do today, trying to find that correlation between consciousness and the physical world. One more time for the listeners, where can they find your work and where can they reach out to you if they want to?
Sure. Psychedelichistorian.com. And if you're interested, I have several articles that go further into debunking the holy mushroom hypothesis, if your listeners are interested. I also have a YouTube page, which is just, I don't have enough subscribers yet to have it be youtube.com/psychedelic historian. But if you just go to YouTube and just type in psychedelic historian, all my stuff will come up. And then on Instagram, psychedelic historian. So pretty much social media / psychedelic historian, and it'll all be there.
Right on. And I want to thank you again, Tom, for talking to me today. And I really had a great time.
Me too.
And I did enjoy our talk.
Yeah, dude. No, seriously, like this was fantastic. It was so much more conversational, which is what I prefer. Sometimes it's like interviewers, it's like they ask this question and then I talk for 5 minutes, then they ask a question. I'd end it like with no carryover from what was said. But, you're a great interviewer, man. Like, I'm not just saying that to flatter you. Like you actually listen. Like I've done interviews and like I can literally hear in the background that they're like in their kitchen cooking food because I could hear pots and pans, clinking and the faucet turned on. And it's like, dude, in the very least, mute your microphone so that, the whole world doesn't know that you're not even listening, that you don't care that much. So thank you. This is fantastic. Dude, you are great at this.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. And whenever you want to come on, man, you let me know and we can shoot the shit. It doesn't have to be it can be about whatever. I try and stick to a certain topic. That way I can name my episodes. But I've done free form where we just talk about whatever. And again, when it comes to this realm, I'm a student. I learn from people like you. I think it's a privilege that I can speak to people like you who, again, know more than I do, and that's what I'm here for. And that's why whenever I'm doing an interview, I give the person 100% of my attention because I want to learn from this. And this podcast is an archive of things for me. And I listen to my own podcast, dude. I'll fucking put it on and I'll listen. And again, if I forgot something, I'll hear and I go, oh wow, that's what that was. And again, whenever you want to come on, you just let me know and we'll shoot the shit.
I will. I'm a student too, so I look forward to learning more from you as well.
Appreciate it, Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juan. Peace.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was Tom Hatsis. Make sure to check out his work. I will put his links in the episode notes. Also, make sure to check us out at the Juan Podcast on Instagram. Also, make sure to check out our shirts. I am doing custom art for those. And if you want to reach out to me, I want to hear from you guys. I want to see if you guys are enjoying the show. What you guys think. I'm open to all types of criticism. I don't give a fuck. So reach out to me, the Juan Podcast at gmail.com. And as always, stay safe. And until next time.